So thank you for coming along tonight. For those of you that don't know me, my name is John Dove. I'm a solicitor advocate at MAJ Law. Some of you might know me because I run the National Speed Mooting competition every year, and I know that some of you have competed in that before. This is the third in our series of Q&A sessions that we're running, and tonight we've called it the Alternative Pathways Talk, because we've got a number of people that have taken quote-unquote alternative pathway into the law. So it should be quite an interesting talk tonight, and I'm really looking forward to this. I'm just going to introduce you to Sunny Salam, who's been running this Q&A series with me. So Sunny, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. So as John said, I'm Sunny. I'm a second-year trainee at Woolf Solicitors, which is a West Midlands-based firm. Currently in my final seat, which is a split two-way seat in civil litigation and employment litigation. Prior to that, my first seat was in residential property. I'm due to qualify on the 1st of October. And apart from that, I'm also a professional mentor for Birmingham City University students. So that's a little bit about me. I'll pass you over to John again. He can explain the rules of the session and introduce the panel to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so just before I jump in to explain how this is going to work tonight, I'm going to introduce you to each of our panellists who are going to give a quick talk just to introduce who they are and give you a little bit of background. So first we've got Callum Brook, who is a barrister at Central Chambers.
Oh, John, why do I have to first? Hi, I'm Callum, and I'm not looking at the screen, but I am now. I'm a family law barrister practicing in Manchester. I specialise in children law. So for those of you that do or do not know what that means, I either try and take your children away on behalf of local authorities, I try and keep your children with you on behalf of parents, or I sit somewhere on the fence representing children in the course of those types of proceedings. Once upon a time, for a very, very, very brief period, I was a solicitor, qualified in 2017. I was a solicitor for about 6 weeks, and then I transferred to the bar. So that is the introduction to me.
Thank you, Callum. Next, we've got James Oliveira-Agnew, who is a barrister with Erimus Chambers.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. Good evening. So I'm a barrister specialising. I have a mixed practice. Most of my work these days is criminal work, specialising in serious sexual offences. I also do some work on family law, normally representing, it's normally fathers, sometimes mothers, who have been charged or convicted of serious sexual offences and are dealing with their children. And I also do some immigration work, and occasionally when the diary is a bit loose, I do some family work. So that's my my specialisms. Jack of all trades, master of none. I qualified as a barrister in 2008. I transferred and became a solicitor in 2011, and I came back to the bar again in 2018, which you can't do anymore, but that was my routine.
Thank you. Next, we have Carl Woolf, who is a solicitor advocate with Noble Solicitors.
Thanks, John. As John said, my name's Carl Woolf. I work for Noble Solicitors, which is a largest firm, number of offices in Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire, and London. I've qualified too long ago now, 1995, and although I started off doing civil and family and conveyancing, I moved very quickly into criminal law, which effectively I've specialised in really for the last 20-25 years. My practice primarily is serious violence, so murder, GBH, robbery, large-scale white-collar crime, fraud, some terrorism work, and when I'm not doing that, I'm a visiting associate professor at Brunel University.
Thank you, Carl. Next, we have Gerard Rogerson, who is a barrister with the CPS.
Hi, I'm Gerard Rogerson. As you've heard, I'm a barrister employed as a Crown Advocate with the Crown Prosecution Service. I qualified as a solicitor in 1997, spent the best part of 20 years. In 1997 I qualified. I joined the CPS in 2003, where I took my higher rights qualification, and I transferred to the bar in 2017. So I prosecute in the Carlisle Crown Court on a daily basis.
Thank you. Next we have Sarah Ramsey, who is a tutor with the University of Law.
Hi, yeah, Sarah Ramsey. I'm the Dean at the University of Law Birmingham campus. My background was really in family law, so I qualified also 1997, mixed bag of family work, quite a lot of childcare work. And then in 2001, I left practice to start as a tutor at the University of Law and have then gone through various roles till I'm running the Birmingham campus.
Thank you. We have John Dilworth, who was a barrister with the CPS.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I think this is going to make me feel really old because I left school in 1975 when I was 16, and I had no idea at all that I wanted to be a lawyer. But I worked for the local authority in a department that used to prosecute people for not having car tax, and I ended up getting a feel for the law. I joined the court service. I did a law degree part-time. I eventually qualified as a barrister working part-time. And then I joined the Crown Prosecution Service in 1988. I prosecuted cases in the Magistrates Court and the Crown Court. I headed up the complex casework unit for a while. And then I eventually retired 18 months or so ago in the role of Deputy Chief Crown Prosecutor. So in terms of alternative pathways, I've had an alternative pathway into the law. So hopefully we can have an interesting evening.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. And finally, we have Daniel Lowe, who is a solicitor with Rogers.
Thanks, John. So hi, everyone. My name is Daniel. I am a private equity lawyer. I am currently based in Singapore, so it's kind of late for me here. But prior to this, I was in Hong Kong. I worked there for 2 years as an in-house counsel for a private equity firm. And then prior to that, I trained at Dentons in Canada, and I qualified as a oil and gas lawyer before becoming a private equity lawyer. So that's kind of my little alternative pathways bit. And lastly, I am qualified in Canada, UK, and the BVI. So that's another tidbit there.
Thank you, Daniel. So that's our panel for tonight. The way it's going to work is we're going to split the evening into two parts. The first part of the evening will be the pre-prepared questions that you've submitted in advance when you signed up. So I'll spend the first part of the evening up until around 8 o'clock answering those questions. When we get to around 8 o'clock, we're going to jump on to questions that you have on the evening, so anything that you can think of tonight. You notice that there's a chat box at the bottom, so as the evening goes on, if you think of anything, put a question in there, we can come to it later, or when we get to that part of the session, you can put your hand up and ask the question then, and we'll turn to you. In terms of rules for the evening, you will notice that you were all muted when you came into the meeting. If those who have attended as participants would like to remain on mute, and then when you want to ask a question, you can then take yourself off mute at that stage. So they're the rules for the evening, and we'll crack on from there. So the first question that we have is, some of you are ex-solicitors. What made you choose to become a barrister now? Why not the barrister route in the first place? We'll turn to Gerard to answer this one first.
Okay, perhaps an unusual answer, but the reason I didn't become a barrister in the first place was because I didn't think I was good enough to become a barrister. I finished my law degree in 1991, and back then I simply fell into the way of training as a solicitor, and to me the bar was a very distant aspiration. And at the time, I wasn't entirely sure what area of law I wanted to go into. I went down the path of doing the legal practice course, and then I worked for a high street practice doing all aspects of law. So whereas from a very early age, I think about 11 years old, I always wanted to be a lawyer, and the image of being a lawyer I had in my own mind was standing up in court and being an advocate. That didn't actually come to fruition until later on in my career. What made me convert from being a solicitor advocate to a barrister? There's a number of reasons for that, and I'll briefly tell you those. The first is, again, quite frankly, it's the idea of a safety net. I work for the Crown Prosecution Service. The deployment of Crown advocates to the Crown Court is at the ultimate discretion of the Director of Public Prosecutions. It could be said to be a political decision. If ever the rug were pulled, as it were, on the Crown Advocate's strategy, I wanted to have the backup of being able to go to the external bar. The other reason for doing it was because I'd been doing what other barristers did for a number of years. I've been practicing in the Crown Courts for 12 years solid. I was watching people around me doing exactly the same work as I was, and I'm afraid to say there still remained a degree of, I wouldn't go so far as to call it prejudice, but a degree of different treatment from perhaps some judges or some other colleagues between being a solicitor advocate and being a barrister. So that was one of the reasons. Also, the pride that I took in personal achievement of being called to the bar, the fantastic historical ceremony that the Inn of Court have when you are called to the bar, and also, on a lighter note, so that I could go to the legendary bar messes. And I've been to a few of those since I was called 3 years ago. And I think the whole experience is one of feeling much more included within things going on in the local circuit. So those were my main reasons for becoming a barrister.
Excellent, thank you. James, do you have anything to add to that at all?
Well, so my reasoning was slightly different, actually. I mean, I think the opposite of Gerard. I came to the bar initially. So when I first, I did what was the BVC then, showing my age, what was the College of Law. I think Sarah will remember the times when it was the College of Law, not the university. And I was called in 2008, but I didn't finish pupillage for one reason and another. And so I came out of the bar and I went to work for a friend of mine who ran a solicitor's office. And in 2011, I was able to do what they called the Qualified Lawyers Transfer Test. So I took that test and I became a solicitor. And I was able to do that without having to do a training contract because of my experience being called to the bar. I always wanted to be a barrister, and I really just carried on. I took my higher rights in 2014. I was doing a lot of criminal work, a lot of magistrates' court work, and I wanted to be a barrister. And I think, as Gerard said, part of that is, I've seen solicitor advocates in Crown Courts who I know have been practicing longer than I have, who are questioned by judges as to, are they sure they can handle this type of case? And whereas as a barrister, you just turn up and say, I'm at the bar. And they say, well, of course you can have this murder trial. Well, not a problem. So I think I always wanted to go into the bar. A sickening thing. In 2017, I was able to decide I wanted to come to the bar and be a barrister. And so I wrote to the Bar Council and I paid £50 and I transferred from being a solicitor to being a barrister. And I got my practicing certificate. And then I found I had a chambers who were offering me tenancy, and I went into it like that. So I have never, and see this obviously will probably make me not work again. I've never done a training contract. I've never done a pupillage. So and yet I am dual qualified as both a fully practicing barrister and a fully practicing solicitor. So that was the old days. You can't do that anymore, unfortunately. But that was my route into it, and it's a very strange route, but I think it worked for me. And as I say, unfortunately, you can't do it anymore. They've shut that door. You have to go and do the LPC and the training contract if you want to be a solicitor now, which is probably fair enough. But that was my way. I always wanted to be a barrister, and I just had to find another way into it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Callum, do you have any final words on that point?
Not really, John, to be honest. No, I'm kidding. Similar to James, actually, I did the BPTC and was called to the bar in 2013. It just so happened that, like a lot of people, when they finish the BPTC, you end up working in a solicitor's firm as a paralegal. And I was offered a fully paid up LPC transfer and training contract before I was offered the pupillage. And in the course of that, I managed to persuade my boss to let me do my higher rights of audience, both in crime and civil, even though the firm practiced no crime at all. So that all got paid for. And like James, I found the lovely loophole that essentially says, chuck us 55 quid and we'll automatically transfer you over. Hence why, within 6 weeks of qualifying as a solicitor, I then got my practicing certificate as a barrister and started practicing as a self-employed barrister in chambers. The difference between me and James is I did have to do a period of training for a training contract, because unfortunately they well and truly shut the door on that one beforehand. That I remember talking to some friends a couple of years more senior to me, saying they used to hand out a certificate at the end of the BPTC saying, sign this and you'll be able to automatically qualify as a solicitor. But unfortunately I didn't get that one. So I have had a degree of training, he says. What difference that makes to my practice, I don't know. And then moved into a completely different area of law to what I was actually doing. So it's been a bit, I'm afraid I haven't got a particularly exciting and alternative route in a sense. I didn't do a different career or anything like that. I knew what I wanted and I went and got it. It was essentially the point there.
Excellent. Thank you, Callum. Sonny, do you have the next question there?
Yeah. So the next question is, what advice would you give to a career changer coming into law at the age of 43? Can I ask John if he can have a go at that question for me, please?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing I would say is don't underestimate the transferable skills that you've got, because being a lawyer isn't all about knowing the law. It's about being able to interact with people in an empathetic way. It's about understanding people's situations. It's about communicating with people and explaining complex things in a way in which people can readily understand them. And depending on the career that you've had before, it may well be that you have acquired all of those skills or many of those skills prior to entering the law. So, for example, I recently spoke to a lady who had qualified as a midwife initially, and then she decided when she became a little bit older that she wanted to go into the law. Well, I suppose somebody who's been able to deliver babies has got to have to be able to be calm under pressure, and that's a skill. And being able to reassure people, that's a skill. And lawyers like to deliver results, and if you've been delivering babies, then hopefully you can deliver results.
Thanks, John. Some really practical advice there. Carl, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I've always been in the law since I first qualified. However, I've spoken to a number of people who are solicitors and barristers who have gone in at different levels, and I think the advice that you've just heard is exactly right. Your other skills can be transferred. As a lawyer, what we're looking for is people skills, particularly if you're going into crime, dealing with real people in real life situations. So whether you've worked in Sainsbury's all your life on the checkout, or or done something else, been a police officer, you have interpersonal skills and you're used to dealing with those people. So as long as I think you come into it with your eyes open and understand that the law is difficult, particularly criminal law, the hours are long, the work is hard and it's very demanding, then why not go for it? There are some great lawyers. One of the local lawyers in St Albans who prosecutes came into the law at the age of 50 and is one of the best prosecutors that we've got. Fair, but intelligent. It hasn't stopped him, so I would advocate for doing it.
Thanks, Carl. Another really good answer. John, did you want to ask question 3?
Yeah. So the next question is, what's the biggest learning curve you faced on your journey to the bar? But I think I'll expand that question and say your journey into your sort of career. So whether you're at the bar or whether you are a solicitor. So I'll begin with Daniel on this one. If you've got anything in terms of any learning curves on your way into your career.
Yeah, thanks. Learning curves in terms of becoming a solicitor, I think it's the practice management, actually. Not many people talk about it. We don't talk about it in the LPC or in law school, but little things like how to file emails, how to run black lines, these kind of simple things not many law students know. And for me, it took like 6 months up to a year during my training contract to kind of pick that up. And even now, as like a fifth-year lawyer, I'm still struggling to manage my inbox on Friday nights, kind of thing. So I think having a good grasp of practice management would be really good for becoming a solicitor.
Fantastic, thank you. John, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, if I could just build upon what Daniel has just said, it's really important to be organised, because quite often you need to be able to access material quickly. And if you don't master your inbox and you have a chaotic practice, then you're not going to be very successful. But I think I'd also say one of the biggest learning curves for me was, don't assume that everybody else knows more than you know. Because the danger is when you first start practicing, you assume that everybody knows everything, and you know very little at all. It's all about what you put into it, and it's all about preparation. And if you prepare, then you will be effective as a lawyer, whether it's as an advocate or in some other sphere.
Thank you. Okay. Do we have anyone else that would like to contribute on any sort of learning curve on their journey into their final destination?
I think the only thing I would say is I clearly remember going from being a student to going into work. I wasn't prepared for the level, not responsibility, but the level of the workload, because as a student, although I had lots of exams, in effect, I wasn't going to university every day. I had plenty of time to do it, and all of a sudden, going in as it then was, an article clerk, trainee solicitor, you effectively get dumped with stuff, and the pressure builds very quickly. And if you've never experienced that or seen it, because you've done either a mini pupillage or sort of some work experience in a solicitor's firm, I would certainly say it's worthwhile doing that and speaking to other trainees, because that is one of the things that came as a real shock to me, how quickly the pressure ramped up.
Excellent. Thank you. Sonny, do you have the next question?
Yeah, thanks, John. So the next question is, what are the advantages and disadvantages for a solicitor advocate, and is it a better route? I think that's another one for you, Carl, but then we can ask you afterwards, John, because you could probably say something as well, couldn't you?
For me, I became a solicitor advocate for one simple reason, and that was I couldn't afford to go to the bar. I couldn't afford to be self-employed. I didn't have, financial support behind me, and I needed the regularity and the safety net of an income. And so that's why I became a solicitor. When I qualified, solicitor advocates had only been a thing for a couple of years. Up until then, all solicitors, as they do now, have what they call inherent rights of audience. You can advocate in the magistrates' court, in the county court. As a criminal solicitor, you can go to the Crown Court on bail applications. You can even do appeals in the Crown Court, as long as either you or a member of your firm have acted for the client in the magistrates' court. But you couldn't do trials. Very quickly I decided that trials was what I wanted to do. I was quite lucky. I worked for a firm that prosecuted privately for the RSPCA and for the Federation Against Copyright Theft. So I was already going into the Crown Court to do appeals, and I sort of got the bug. I've had opportunities to transfer to the bar, and I've never taken them. And the reason I've never taken them is because, again, I like paid holidays. I like the fact that I'm going to get a particular salary on a particular day. My mortgage is going to get paid. And the reality is, although the training as a solicitor advocate in terms of advocacy, I think, I don't know recently, is probably not as good as it is as a barrister. As you pick up experience, and you get a lot of experience as a criminal solicitor in the magistrates' court, you do pick up that experience. And now I find that there is nothing that I can't do that a barrister can do, with one exception. Barristers, self-employed barristers, can prosecute and defend, whereas as an in-house solicitor advocate in a defence firm, unless your firm happens to be a prosecute for a prosecuting authority, you can only defend. But for me, there is no reason for me to go to the bar. Yes, I've had problems with judges, I've had problems with other barristers. When I first started, you may know the gown that a solicitor advocate wears is the same as a court usher's gown, and it was only in the last few years that solicitors could actually wear wigs. And many times I was stopped by barristers who knew me as I walked down the corridor with my client, and they would ask me as a joke, in inverted commas, to go and photocopy some papers, or could I show them the way to the canteen, assuming I was an usher. But other than that, over the last few years, I've dealt with judges. As a young barrister, you'll find a judge who will shout at you. Yes, there are some judges now who still think solicitors are not quite as good. There are awful solicitor advocates, and I have to say there are awful junior barristers. I'm lucky, my practice is great, the judges seem to like me, the clients like me, so I can't see a reason to transfer to the bar at this stage anyway.
Thanks for that, Carl. Really comprehensive answer. John, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I feel a bit of an imposter here, because the only reason I became a barrister was that when I was working in the court service as a court clerk, or legal advisor as we call them now, and I'd completed my degree, the choices open to me were to take a year off, paid leave, by the way, and go to Chester Law College, or go to Manchester Poly 1 day per week, and have 3 months study leave at the end. And my employer opted for the latter, really, giving me study leave. I was very grateful for all the support I received. Speaking to my experience in the Crown Prosecution Service, there is little or no difference in reality as to whether you are a solicitor or a barrister within the Crown Prosecution Service. Clearly, you only prosecute, you don't defend. In terms of the routes open to higher rights in the Crown Court, I think Gerard has already alluded to this. You can qualify and get your higher rights in the Crown Court when you are a prosecutor, whether you are a solicitor or a barrister. And it's disappointing, albeit I can speak, from my own experience of this, that it's disappointing that some people are discriminated against, or feel as though they're discriminated against, simply because they're not wearing a wig or a particular type of gown. Because I have seen some appalling barristers, and I've seen some outstanding solicitor advocates. I've also seen some outstanding barristers and very poor solicitor advocates. So it isn't what is on your head that counts, it's what's in your head and how you project that to the court. I'm hoping that over the years, the differences between the two professions is going to evaporate. And I can see a time in due course when the two professions will be a difference without a distinction. We are now seeing solicitors as High Court judges. We're seeing solicitors as Crown Court judges. And whereas when I first started, it was unheard of for that to be the case, I think that will become more and more of the norm in the years to come. And I think that's a good thing.
Thank you, John. That's brilliant. John, do you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, I think before we move on, I'd just like to see if either Gerald or James have anything else to add on that point at all.
On the question in general, John, do you mean?
Yes, yes.
We're still on the learning curve one, aren't we?
Yeah. Well, we're talking about the difference between the barrister and a solicitor advocate, because
yes.
you've practiced in both capacities. So just seeing if you had any comments at all.
I would echo the words of John. I mean, he's absolutely right. There was no practical difference whatsoever. No overnight change or dramatic difference in what I was doing from one day to the next between being a solicitor advocate and being called to the bar. The only thing that changed was how people addressed me and my official title. Yes, just to again echo what John says, the opportunities are there for everybody, and I would agree with him in terms of the varying qualities between solicitor advocates and indeed between barristers. And I share his disappointment, and I've seen it firsthand as well, that prejudice does still exist, although I also agree with John that I think it is gradually being eroded.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, I think the only thing, I would go back to what Carl said. I think a lot of it comes down to, especially in a time like this. So for example, since the last court hearing I did was the 20th of March. And since that time, I've done quite a lot of work. I've prepped defence case statements. I've read through probably in the near on region of 20,000 pages of unused material. I've read police statements. I don't get paid for any of that. That's not part of what we get. We get trial fees. And so as Carl says, I think it's all down to how you view yourself really, and how you want to, you go forward. A solicitor advocate working in a firm has all the advantages of the pension, your paid holiday, knowing when your pay is coming from. There is an independence to the bar. There are times when I don't want to go to work, and I say to my clerk, I don't want to go to work for, a week. In 3 weeks, I want to have a holiday, and they say fine. So it's really your sort of personality, I think, as well, comes down to it. I think a solicitor advocate will always have a sort of imposter syndrome feeling the first time they go into a Crown Court, for example. Junior barristers will have imposter syndrome feeling. I've spoken to QCs who still get it. So I think everyone in a court, unless you're a certain type of person, will always feel, oh, I'm not sure I belong here. So I don't think there's a real difference. The only thing I'd ask for Carl, I think, is I'm curious as to whether or not Carl wears a wig.
Well, that's an interesting question. I tend to wear wigs for the bigger trials because the clients expect it, and I don't want the jury sitting there thinking, why can we see Carl's shiny head and he's not wearing a wig? But I've done trials without wigs, and as a rule, judges are used to it by now. It's great in the summer when the air conditioning breaks down. I just don't wear my wig. Barristers don't have that luxury because solicitors can choose to whether they want to or not. So, but as a rule, I do. And if I'm being led or if I'm leading, then I'll always wear a wig because normally that's expected.
Yeah, see, that would be my biggest advantage, I think, as a solicitor advocate. I'd say you get the choice of whether to wear a wig or not, and because they are blastedly uncomfortable in the middle of summer in the Crown Courts when there's absolutely no air conditioning and you're absolutely boiling. So yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Some great practical advice there. Okay, the next question is specifically for Sarah. It begins with a number of pleasantries, and the crux of the question is, could you please shed some light on why professionals are drawn to academia?
Yeah, great question. Look, everyone is different and everyone's personal situation is different. So I can speak from my own experience. Like I say, I did quite a lot of family work, some crime as well, initially, legally aided, certainly at the end of the 1990s was, I think, when some of my colleagues on the panel will probably agree, we started seeing some very significant changes with legal aid. It became very difficult to make money. Fees started to get cut. The other thing for me was I did a lot of childcare work, and while I did enjoy it, it could be incredibly difficult and really quite emotionally draining to deal with childcare work, especially when you're dealing directly with the clients or acting for the children, because there is really some quite, shocking things to read or that you see when you're doing it. And I also personally really enjoyed the aspects of my job where I had a paralegal or a trainee, and I found that I really liked that mentoring and training, and I got a great deal from helping other people get on. And it was just at a point in my career where the firm I was at, I'd gone from quite a big regional firm to a slightly smaller firm for promotion, but I wasn't really feeling the place I was at, and I just randomly happened to see an advert for tutors at the College of Law, as it was then, and that's where I'd gone and done my LPC some years before. And I think it was one of those, oh, well, that sounds interesting, and I quite like the training aspect of it. Let's give it a go. And I did get offered a role, and it also corresponded with a move to the Midlands at the same time. So that was my particular reason for transferring. I think a lot of people come and I obviously interview and recruit lots of tutors now, and we do recruit them from practice in the main. And people often say, you know, I've kind of got as far as I want to go in this particular role. I've found that if I want to progress, I need to be doing less practical work and more marketing. I really enjoy the training aspect of it. You know, these are sort of reasons people give. And I think also, in some areas, it's very difficult for people, whether it's at the bar or in private practice. We do get people who are starting families, you know, both men and women who are saying, actually, I need a little more control over my time and my days. You know, I need to be able to know that I'm not, you know, going to have to work till 10 o'clock at night. You know, that there are lots of reasons people have. But I would say the main thing, and what we always look for, is that passion for training and for inspiring the next generation and passing on what you know. So I think those would probably be the main reasons.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah. Okay, so the next question is, can you give some examples of things that stand out on CVs? So do we have anyone that would like to jump in with any suggestions on this? John?
Yeah, if I may, because I've seen, in my former job, before I retired, I did a lot of recruitment. And what you're really looking for on a CV is somebody who has done something in their life, done something with their life. So, for example, it might be amateur dramatics, it might be someone who's been in a dancing club or in a scout group or whatever. Because what that tells me, or tells us, is that you are somebody who has got some application about you. You aren't just somebody who goes to college and, you know, get your professional qualifications. Because talking about the transferable skills I mentioned earlier, it may well be that amateur dramatics will help you in your advocacy. I'm not entirely sure how dancing would help you, but I mean, at least it shows that you've got some application. So you're looking for someone on their CV who can stand out and, you know, jump off the page and say, well, I'd really like to interview this person. I once saw a CV where somebody had done some skydiving, and I thought, how brave is that? And I don't think we gave that person an interview simply on the skydiving, but I was quite intrigued to meet them. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you. Do we have any other suggestions on this at all?
Yeah, John, I can add a few things. So recently we've been seeing a lot of, especially in the corporate side, CVs that have anything to do with technology, especially the advent of legal tech. So if you're involved in kind of legal technology, you did a startup, you're an entrepreneur, you helped write blogs on the topic. A lot of law firms are actually very interested in that because, as you can tell, a lot of the Magic Circle guys, there's a third path to becoming a lawyer, aside from kind of in-house in private practice. There's becoming a legal technologist. And I think it's really picking up steam. I think in the UK it has, and in Asia it also has as well. So I think any exposure to legal technology doesn't mean you have to be coding, but it does mean that you should understand the basis of kind of HTML and whatnot. I think those are very valuable on a CV nowadays.
Excellent, good advice there. So when, Daniel, when you say legal technologist, would you like to expand on that slightly?
Yeah, sure. So legal technologists, as in kind of technologies that makes kind of legal process easier. So say it's very simple, like iManage, Worksite helps us kind of sorts out our documents and whatnot. That's legal technology, right? It's not glamorous, it's not sexy, but it is legal technology. So other things like documents that help you do due diligence easier, or helps you kind of find keywords within a stack of documents, those are all part of legal technology. So any kind of technology application that will make your practice easier.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, do we have anyone else that has any examples of things they've seen or they can think of that will stand out on a CV?
Well, I'll tell you what, John, I'll address it in this way. I've been doing the SIFT and heavily involved in recruitment in chambers now for the past two and a half years. So much so that they even had me write the advocacy exercise. It was terrible. But what I'd say to you, what really stands out when I'm going through 400 CVs is sometimes how badly written they are, or how badly written covering letters are. And it's just a really easy way. You might be a fantastic candidate. You might be absolutely brilliant. You might have a first-class degree from somewhere. You might be the most interesting person in the world. But if I find 3 spelling mistakes in your letter, you're an easy out. So there's just a really basic piece of advice to people is, even if you're not the one reading it, proofreading it, get someone else to proofread it. Because it's a really easy way for chambers or solicitors firms to just put you on the dustbin pile and not think about you again. Because you think about the limited time I've already got, and I'm going through all these cover letters and I'm trying to weed people out of the situation, getting down to the best candidates, you're just not going to get through. So a really basic piece of advice is just make sure, spend that little bit of extra time. I know it's really stressful. I know there's a particular window now because the Bar Standards Board have from on high declared that we can only do these things in a certain time period now. But make sure that you're on top of that cover letter, you're on top of your CV. There's no spelling mistakes. You're not giving me an excuse just to get rid of you. So that would be my top tip. Is just spag spelling and grammar. It's just really easy to get lost in it.
John, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, if I could just add to that and build upon it, because it's absolutely right. We underestimate the importance of written advocacy, and a CV is effectively a piece of written advocacy, as is a job application. And so, if I get an application and it's all replete with spelling mistakes and grammatical errors and things like that, then that's going to be very off-putting. But also if I get jumbled text without headings and paragraphs, I don't know what's wrong with the world these days, but paragraphs seem to have gone out of the window. So if you have it set out in an attractive format, you're halfway there, because you can lose the will to live if you're trying to unravel a lot of jumbled text. So think about the importance of written advocacy and the importance of making a first good impression with the attractive way in which you set out your application.
Thank you. Carl, were you about to jump in as well?
Yeah, I was simply going to say that I see a lot of CVs that have hundreds of mini pupilages or lots of mini bits of work experience, but without any particular focus. And we know that by and large, a mini pupillage or some work experience often means just following behind a solicitor or a barrister and not doing very much. I think I go back to what John said right at the very beginning. If you've got something unusual on your CV, that certainly stands out. Remember, certainly as a solicitor, if you're going to a firm, we're going to be working with you. We want somebody who is, who's interesting, who we're going to enjoy working with. But from a legal point of view, when you're looking for work experience, think outside of the box. Don't just think about the mini pupillage route. Maybe there's a law centre you can go to. Maybe you can volunteer at a charity. The things which bring you into contact with the type of clients that we're likely to be dealing with day in and day out. For me, and the people that look at CVs in my firm is more important than lots of mini pupilages and lots of types of work experience.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's crucial. Always think about any skills that you have and how they can transfer across to being a lawyer. And as we've heard as well, always double check those CVs, look for the spellings, look for the grammatical errors. Do you know the difference in you did and done, you wasn't where? Have you used your full stops and commas appropriately? So always double check the CV and the application form.
Oh, John, don't put your photograph on it either, please.
Have you had that, Callum?
No, my God, please don't put your photograph on your CV. It's hard enough keeping them anonymised as it is. Well, when they've got a picture of themselves on it.
Well, we didn't think that needed to be said, but there we go. There's your advice, ladies and gentlemen. Keep the photographs off the CV. Right. Okay. So I think we'll take one more question, and then we'll jump onto the spontaneous questions. So the final one is: would you recommend the pathway that you took to others? So we begin with John on this one.
Well, it's difficult to recommend it because actually I doubt anybody would do it that way these days. All I would say is I had a fantastic career. I did lots of interesting jobs. Before I joined the court service, I worked for the local authority, then I worked in the court service, and then being a prosecutor for the majority of my career was absolutely fantastic. And it was an absolute privilege to do the job I did. You never have a boring day. Every day is different. I always used to say to people that my job is listening to people's stories, and some of them were quite incredible. So I would certainly recommend the career or commend the career I had, although I don't think I'd necessarily commend the route I took, because I don't think many people would do it that way these days.
Daniel, as an international lawyer, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I would not change anything in terms of my international career, just because I love to travel. I love to see kind of new things. I love variety in my life. So for me, staying stagnant is not the best for my personality. So I think I've always pursued, the road less traveled. So, this is my third city already. So I would highly recommend for young lawyers to, if they have the opportunity to practice internationally, to do so. You'll build your international network and it will benefit you in the long run.
And finally, we'll turn to Gerard.
I would say this: my pathway was not so much a pathway from something else into law. It's a pathway within law itself. But yeah, I would certainly recommend the way I did it. And I think one of the important things to remember is that your legal career is flexible. It's fluid. You may wish to change what you do. What I would suggest is that if you know from very early on what you want to do, for example, you have a leaning towards advocacy, take that route, build up the experience there, and then perhaps look at other things if you feel you want to change later on in your career. But it's in your hands. I would say personally that although I envisaged as a child that advocacy is what I wanted to do, I took quite a circuitous route in getting there, but I did ultimately end up where I wanted to be, albeit far later than I thought I would. And those opportunities are there, but build your experience and then look at your options.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so we'll turn on to the spontaneous questions now. So the questions that I've had coming through. If anyone thinks of any further questions, always feel free to put your hand up or put a question into the group chat if you don't want to ask it that way. So I'll work my way through the questions that we've received. So the first one is, how is the employed bar different? Is solicitor advocacy equivalent in the new training changes for the bar qualification? So I think once again, Gerald, I don't know if you'd like to begin with this one in terms of describing the difference of the employed bar to self-employed bar.
Yes, well, I mean, the key difference between the employed bar and the self-employed bar, of course, is, if you like, the stability that the employed bar gives you. I always think one of the things that must be quite difficult and indeed very brave to go into the self-employed bar is that you are your own boss and you are your own income. And if you fall ill, for example, then you will not have income. And also, I understand income can be quite sporadic. It can come in peaks and troughs. So that's one of the things to take into account. If you want the stability of knowing exactly how much money you're going to have coming in each month and that you're going to be able to meet your bills, do that. And perhaps a move to the employed bar would be better in those circumstances. Employed bar, from the point of view of civil service as well, offers additional perks and benefits, flexi leave, annual leave, sickness policies, etc. So there are a lot of advantages there to be considered. But the advantages, I would say, of the self-employed bar, well, you are your own boss. You are accountable chiefly to yourself and your clerk. and I suppose your earning potential is very much in your own hands.
Excellent. Thank you. I don't know if we have anyone else that would like to contribute to this answer. James?
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit from the self-employed route. Yeah, I think obviously it depends your sort of personality, really. I mean, it's you are self-employed, so if you don't work, you don't get paid. As I say, the whole COVID situation has knocked everything quite substantially. There are quite a lot of issues at the moment, especially in the criminal bar. It's quite a difficult route to give yourself any assurances with money and to make sure that you're looking after yourself. If you've got children, you know, obviously if I don't know anyone that's unlucky enough to be married to a lawyer and be a lawyer, but I think if there were two barristers in the same house, yeah, you'd want one of you to be self-employed and one of you to be employed. But I think the self-employed bar obviously does give you that advantage of being a bit more flexible. You can sort of come and go as you please. But yeah, I mean, money is the key issue. And, you know, obviously I cast no aspersions on my solicitor colleagues or my CPS colleagues. Some firms and organisations take a little longer to pay self-employed barristers than others. As I say, I'm not naming the CPS, but that's it can be a bit longer. But I think you get yourself a good sort of basis. You're not on your own. You know, you have a clerking team around you. That clerking team is really, really important because they are the ones that deal with everything. I mean, I don't go out and get work. My clerk does. I do the work and I form basis of relationships with solicitors and I talk to people, but the majority of my work is with you know, for my clerk. And I must say, from a purely selfish point of view, it does give me that chance to do a case, end the case. That's my involvement finished. I don't have anything else to do with it. I don't have to answer to clients. I'm not direct access. I literally finish a case at the end of the day, and win or lose, I move on to the next one and don't have to worry about it. So I like that. I like that aspect of it, that I can go, you know, decide that, especially with criminal bar, you know, sometimes you feel you've done a bit too much of certain type of work, and, you know, by the time you're on your 15th paedophile, you think perhaps there's something else out there, and you can do a bit of sort of civil or a bit of something else for a little bit. So I think the self-employed bar is that flexibility, but certainly with having a security and a job that you can rely on each month, the employed bar is certainly an option to look at.
Brilliant, thank you. Before I move on to the next question, does anyone else have anything that they would like to add? No. Okay. This next one is specifically for Sarah. It's a little bit philosophical, this question, actually. It says, what made you decide to go into legal education? And given your direct access to the next generation of lawyers, how do you feel about the future of the legal profession?
Wow. Well, I've answered the one, I think, about why I went into education, certainly in terms of training and, you know, really enjoying that aspect of it. You know, if we're just talking about the students we're dealing with, I've got a massive amount of hope. The students that I'm seeing come through now, I think, are in a really different position, certainly to when I was at law school and when I did a law degree. And I think a lot of people did sort of a fairly standard route in. I think we are seeing people come from all sorts of different backgrounds. I think we are seeing students who've got a real passion for social justice and fairness and wanting to get involved in, you know, all sorts of pro bono work from a very early age. I am seeing students who are balancing family responsibilities, childcare, part-time work, and still getting through their degrees and still getting through their professional courses. I'm seeing people who are prepared to absolutely, you know, slog it out to go to everything they can and to take advantage of, you know, mentoring schemes and things like that, you know, and really persevere. And it's not easy. It's not easy at the moment. Legal education is ever more expensive, both in terms of student loans for your degree and then on to your next course. There's a lot of talk about, will the SQE be cheaper? And I think that really remains to be seen, you know, is it really going to cost any less? But I'm seeing, you know, a lot of people with a real passion and a real determination. And I think the more we get people from different backgrounds, first generation to university, you know, all of this experience that people can bring, then that can only be a good thing. The more diverse the profession becomes, the better our justice system will be. It's a bit of a soapbox for me. I'm very, very, you know, passionate about getting people into the legal profession who don't come from very traditional backgrounds. So yeah, I've got a great deal of hope in our students. I won't talk about things like legal aid and the SQE and things like that, because that might be a wholly different answer. But in terms of students that are coming through, yes, great deal of hope.
Excellent, thank you. The next question we have is quite a direct and specific question. I'm not sure if anyone on the panel will be able to help, but I'll ask anyway. It says, would experience in blockchain and smart contracting, as well as an MSc in legal technology, help at the bar? And which barristers or in-house barristers firms would favour this? Don't know if anyone has any experience to answer this question. John?
I was once told that in the land of the blind man, the one-eyed man is king. And so to answer the question, if you've got a particular specialism where you've got a background in something, then you could possibly corner the market in any litigation in that particular sphere. Now, I'm not an expert. I don't understand the concepts of Bitcoin and things like that, but I'm sure there will be somebody out there who needs the services of somebody who understands all that sort of stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it might be key to have a look out there, start doing your research at this stage as well, see if there are any chambers or specific firms that may well look for in-house counsel, maybe try and get some experience with them. It's always worth, you know, if you find any chambers in that regard, send them an email and ask if you can go and do a couple of days experience with them. So there's nothing to stop you doing that at all. The next question relates to the SILEX qualification. It says, if you have a SILEX qualification done to the academic part, but have just 3 years to go, but just have to do 3 years of qualified experience, I've done previous legal experience which could contribute to the 3-year period. Would you qualify as a solicitor through this route, which exempts you from the training contract and qualifies you quicker, or would you go through the traditional route of a training contract? Some people argue that it's better to get more exposure to seat via a training contract route, and others argue that you can qualify quicker through SILEX. I don't know if anyone has any experience of SILEX and can give a suggestion on this one.
Yeah, I'm not an expert, John, on the SILEX route. I know of students who've done it. I do know that I think there are proposals that route will be going, certainly when SQE comes in, because there won't be any exemptions as far as I understand it. I'm not quite sure at what point SILEX are changing over. I think the answer is it really depends on the firm, the type of work you want to do, because really, whether you can qualify that way or whether they'd want you to do a very traditional training route to be in line with the rest of their recruits, I think depends on the firm. So, you know, I think maybe if you've got the people I know who've done SILEX and qualified that way have already been working in law firms and been supported through that and are going to qualify and stay in that particular area, for example, you know, I don't know, commercial property or something like that. So they are going to carry on doing what they're doing. So that makes perfect sense to do it that way. If you're aiming for, I don't know, a firm where most of their recruitment comes via the traditional training contract route, and that's what you want to do, then you probably want to do the traditional route. So yeah, I guess it really depends on your type of work and type of firm.
Thank you, Sarah. I hope you found that answer helpful. Right, the next question that we have is, what do you think of undertaking virtual work experience, especially during the pandemic? Would you recommend virtual work experience? Have anyone that would like to jump in on this question?
From my perspective, John, family courts have dropped to about 40% capacity at the moment. We have a ground rules setting before the beginning of every hearing, which is when we do virtual hearings now. The general attitude of the court is that if you are not intended to be in that hearing, you are not allowed to be in that hearing. So in terms of doing virtual experience, certainly from a family perspective, it's now impossible at the moment, simply on the basis that the judges simply will not allow people to sit in on virtual hearings. So from my perspective, chambers have just stopped doing mini pupilages during the course of COVID. It just isn't practical for anybody to shadow me when you're not going to get any actual experience of court. It's just not going to happen. I'm in court, but you're just not going to be able to follow me. So turn your attention to other extracurricular activities that you might want to do. Use the time to maybe develop a particular hobby, something, as we were talking about earlier, that might stand out on your CV. But certainly at the moment, don't try and waste too much time putting in mini pupillage applications, because the chambers simply aren't going to take them on at the moment.
Thank you.
I think, John, if I can just come in on this one, very different experience from the one Callum's just described, but I know there are certain pupils within the CPS who've had the opportunity to attend virtual hearings. And if you can, I would wholeheartedly recommend it, because I think it's a very strange introduction to court hearings, but it's a good introduction to digital presentation, which of course is going to be the future. And I can't help but think that when the COVID crisis is over, there will be a much bigger deployment of virtual and remote hearings. So if you do get the opportunity to take part in one, I would really embrace that. And then when you get to go to the court for real, when they reopen, it will just add an extra dimension to your experience of appearing in a courtroom.
Excellent. Thank you, Gerard.
John, I'd just like to add, I'm not sure if it's the same thing with the time of virtual work experience, but I think a lot of the firms like White and Case and whatnot, they're doing kind of virtual work experiences, virtual internships. And if that's what the student is asking, I'd highly recommend you do it, because I think it's just like doing a Coursera course on IP law and whatnot. It kind of adds to your wheelhouse in terms of your knowledge. But one thing I would advise is that I saw a few students list this out on their LinkedIn, on their CVs as a proper kind of work experience or a summer scheme, back scheme. I would not list it as that, because there is no bar to getting into these kind of work experiences, virtual work experiences. It's basically free to come in, and there's no requirement that you hit certain grades or whatnot. So anyone can do it, versus a summer back scheme and whatnot. You have to kind of get certain grades and whatnot. So highly recommend doing those virtual work experiences, but do not list them as a summer back scheme. Just list it as a certificate or kind of knowledge learned.
Excellent. Great advice there. Okay, do we have any other suggestions on this question at all? John?
Yeah, just to say, if you are not already on LinkedIn, you should get yourself on LinkedIn, because you will see lots of opportunities on LinkedIn to do things like virtual moots and bail applications and things like that. I think what I'm seeing emerging is a new world, a new normal, whereby training can be delivered virtually. And in fact, I've got a friend whose daughter has just joined the CPS, and she's been on many, many training courses where actually it's all being delivered virtually. So it's difficult to see how you could do work experience in its conventional format virtually. But there are lots of things that you can do virtually, whether it's taking part in moots or mock bail applications or mock trials or whatever. And also, you know, if you want to see how, for example, the Supreme Court works, you can actually go on the live streaming and see cases being decided in the Supreme Court, and to a lesser extent in the Court of Appeal. So I would say embrace any opportunities that you can through the virtual medium.
Brilliant. Great advice.
Can I just throw one thing in? Because I think I'd just obviously got lots of different opinions on this one. I think I'd probably just echo what Callum said previously, that I think if you're looking perhaps on the LPC training contract route, then there are quite a lot of good schemes out there virtually. Obviously, mini pupilages for the bar route. I mean, I know there are 4 chambers in London who won't be named, but there's 4 chambers in London I know of on the criminal side who have pulled their pupilages for September. So those who were offered pupilages to start in September, they have now been pulled to restart in 2021, simply because I'm not, I don't think, perhaps as beyond my years, I'm perhaps a bit disenchanted. I don't think we will change. I don't think there is going to be a new normal to remote working, especially in criminal courts. I think that the Crown Court judges, High Court judges, I think the Appeals Court judges, they want people in front of them. They don't want virtual hearings. And I think that although there might be some prep work virtually, I certainly haven't seen, what are we now, 3 months into this pandemic, I expected at least half my hearings to be being done virtually, and I'm practically none of them are. So I think there's a difference between sort of having the virtual schemes where you can do like Daniel said, do a little bit of the sort of like semi-vac schemes, as opposed to these kind of mini pupilages, or indeed the pupilages that just don't seem to be going ahead virtually. And it is very, very difficult because it's a very complicated time at the moment. So perhaps if you're looking into the bar route, the self-employed bar route, then yeah, as Callum said, maybe a few other things on your CV as opposed to sort of watching a video of a barrister at work, which fundamentally is all it comes down to. If the hearings go ahead, I mean, half of them we can't hear defendants can't hear us, they fizzle out anyway. So I think that's all I'd say on that one.
Thank you, James.
I was going to say, John, as well, I think take the opportunity to look for anything pro bono online that you could get involved in. I mean, there are some things happening out there. There might be things you can do either through your own university or your law school if you're in one at the moment. Even things like, Amnesty International letter writing campaigns. These are the kind of things that you could potentially do, which are going to help with skills, which is getting that thing to put on the CV. Because people do like to see, things that show you've got some, maybe appetite for social justice or volunteering. I think there are things that potentially you can do at the moment while we're all in this very strange situation that would be a benefit. So have a look out for anything like that. I mean, I know, for example, at ULaw, we've got some of our pro bono teams working on advice sheets for people affected by COVID, whether it's, rental issues or employment issues, so there are things going on. Have a look for those kind of things that you can do remotely. That will help.
Brilliant.
And just jumping onto that from Sarah, just very briefly, I mean, two things at the moment. The Black Lives Matter protests have both got legal observers, which obviously is a bit of a sort of risky situation, but certainly they are always looking for volunteers simply to help people if they're arrested, if they're cautioned at events, anything like that. You don't have to go; it's all done remotely. But they're there. If you search that online, certainly with those protests at the moment, they're always looking for volunteers to help people who are sort of caught in that and need some legal advice. You don't have to be legally qualified to do some of it. I know a lot of barristers are pro bono, a lot of solicitors firms are doing pro bono work, but things like that, current climate events, that they're always looking for somebody to jump in, and even if it's, Sarah said, it's just writing letters on behalf of people, that's there. But the Black Lives Matter protests at the moment are always looking for help.
All right, thank you. Some great advice from all of our panelists there. So we're coming up towards the end of the session now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn to each of our panelists one by one, just for a final piece of information, piece of advice, tip, whatever it might be, just a takeaway message for all of our students tonight. So I'm going to work my way around the screen one by one. So in my top left-hand corner is Daniel. So if you'd like to go first with a takeaway message for the students.
Yeah, takeaway, I think we kind of echoed on LinkedIn, having a presence on LinkedIn. I think that's very important, especially for personal branding. Nowadays, there's tons of law students around. You need to differentiate yourself. So I think LinkedIn was a great way to start.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, I think take advantage of all the people who are offering help out there. There is a lot out there. Get involved in your local law society. Get involved in your local trainee solicitor or junior bar. Take advantage of mentorships. Do that networking, because there's a lot of stuff going on whereby I think you can give yourself a presence, definitely, and get ahead of the crowd.
Brilliant. James, any final words?
Yeah, so I think obviously get yourself to Oxford or Cambridge, get a first, and if you're related to a QC, that's very helpful. Alternative pathways are really what works for you. I mean, certainly I can only speak for the self-employed bar, but it's a profession where you have to be resilient, you have to be tenacious, you have to work out solutions to tricky problems very, very quickly. And I think all of those things from the criminal bar point of view are what you look for in alternative pathways. You know, I think every person here has had a route into their profession that has worked for them. I say jokingly about having a first from Oxford or Cambridge. If you do, that works for you, that's fantastic. If you haven't got that, work something that does work for you. Take all the opportunities, all the advantages, and it's certainly there. Be realistic, I think, as well, is probably what I would say. I mean, I came in that alternative way. I was not going to go and become a solicitor at a Magic Circle firm. I was not, you know, wasn't going to go into a top tier chambers when I transferred back to the bar. You know, I'm not on a QC route, but that works for me, and I think it's what works for you. And be tenacious, be determined, don't give up on it. And as Sarah said, I think diversity. You know, never be told you're not the right looking person for the bar, because the bar, certainly the criminal bar, is supposed to represent society, and we need everyone representing society. So never give up on it. Push away, use the opportunities, and work the route that works for you.
Brilliant. Gerard?
Yeah, just to echo what James has said, perseverance, believe in yourself. And what I would say is this: if you're starting out, don't get too hung up on the idea that, well, I should really know exactly which area of law I want to go into. If you're not sure about it, I think the important thing, which is difficult enough these days, is to get your foot on the ladder, to get some experience, and then you will find out in due course what you like, what you don't like, and you will develop into an area of law that you feel most comfortable with.
Thank you. Carl, any final words?
Yeah, just as Gerard said, keep an open mind. I never thought I'd become a criminal lawyer when I first started out, and the firm that I worked in didn't want me to be a criminal lawyer. It's important, as Gerard said, get your foot in the door, get qualified. You can always change, whether you become a solicitor and then decide to go to the bar, or the other way around. But be brave and take every opportunity, even if you don't think you're qualified for it. There's a famous saying that you miss 100% of the shots that you never take. And if you go for everything, you'll get something. And it's a good way to start, because once you've started, you can always diversify.
Brilliant. Callum, any words of wisdom?
I don't think anybody's ever asked me for words of wisdom, John. I'll be honest. Don't take it personally if you get knocked back. Most of us have been knocked back in our attempts to reach where we are. I can tell you now, 90% of you will not get that pupillage the first year you apply, and probably the same with training contracts. Perseverance is key in this job. So just stick at it, and eventually, for the majority, you'll get where you want to be with it. Whether that is a barrister, solicitor, district judge, circuit judge, high court judge, whatever it is you aspire to be. If you're good enough, you'll get there. Have a look at stuff. The Bar Council have certain initiatives like the My Bar program, thing about social mobility. Have a look at some of the literature on there. Your local law societies that also will have initiatives in terms of, I know certainly the Manchester Law Society does. The local circuit has a lot of initiatives that work with a lot of charities, certainly family law as well, with a charity called Child in Need, Child in Need and Child Concern and things like that. So there's a lot that does go on that you can get involved in at the moment. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're having to bang down the door of chambers or a firm and everyone's turning you away, because we simply can't accommodate you at the moment. So yeah, don't let yourself get down by it. Carry on and persevere.
Excellent. And lastly, John, any final words?
Yeah, I would. The biggest single thing I would say is keep your horizons wide. This evening we've spoken about criminal law and the self-employed bar, as well as the stuff we've had from Daniel, which I have to say, Daniel, I've always found fascinating how you can skip from country to country. It's difficult enough trying to understand what the law is in this country, let alone different jurisdictions. But for example, so far tonight I've spoken about the Crown Prosecution Service, the Court Service, you've got the Government Legal Department, you've got the RSPCA, you've got the Health and Safety Executive, local authorities. There's a whole spectrum there for you to aim at. And as I think which Carl said, you know, sort of use the scattergun approach, and you never know what might stick, and you never know what you might discover that would be a useful career for you. And then the final thing I would say is, and I've always said this, that being a lawyer is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. So it's a lot of hard work, but you get out of it what you put in. And if you don't put anything in, you won't get very much out.
Brilliant. Great advice there from all of our panelists. So that brings us to the end of this Q&A session. I would like to say a huge thank you to everyone for coming along tonight. Thank you to all of our panelists, and of course, thank you to Sonny for helping me to organise this. There's one more Q&A session left in this series, and it will be next Tuesday at 7:15 p.m. It's a panel of pupil barristers. So if anyone is already signed up for that, I hope you're looking forward to it. If anyone isn't and would like to attend, there are a few places left. So if you go to the speedmeeting.com website, you'll be able to sign up there. Tonight's event has been kindly sponsored by publicspeakingtuition.com. So I would like to say a final thank you to everyone for coming tonight, and I'll see you again next time. Thank you.